So here I am with Whitney Miller, who is going to be the interviewer here for this full expose on the Warrior Poet, Aubrey Marcus, history, bio, how I came to be, where I am now, the lessons learned. And so it should be an interesting podcast, a little different than anything we've done before in that, I'd gotten a lot of requests on, to explain a little bit more about, what my past is, where I came from, how I came to be who I am, and give people a little heads up about that. So, we'll dig deep, go through some cobwebs and figure out, a little bit more info on everything, things hopefully I've forgotten, some things I've remembered, and see where it leads us.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm excited. I think a lot of people are going to be pretty excited about this podcast, get to know you a little bit better.
I hope so. That's the idea. Well, all right, Whitney, where should we begin here with this story?
We'll take it from the very beginning, when you were just a little young buck. Where'd you come from? What's your childhood like?
When I was a wee chap.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, basically my mother was a professional tennis player, and she had traveled the world playing tennis, and ended up meeting my father, who was a commodities trader. Started off by teaching him tennis out in Southern California. And they got together just for a brief while. Basically, the cosmos aligned for them to create me, and then split by when I was about 2. But always maintained kind of a close relationship with both. And really the split that happened when I was 2, it happened so young. It really was a blessing as far as I look at it, because then I got 2 more pretty influential and amazing step-parents that came in. And it also, my parents allowed me to see positive examples of loving relationships, where if they would have tried to stick it out, they were fighting a lot, things were more of a challenge. So I think one of the big responsibilities of a parent is not to stay together and give a single family unit and stick it out through the end, but it's to show a positive example about what a loving relationship can be. And so, I applaud my parents for doing that for me. I think that was a big key step, is I didn't see them fighting in a home, all the time. They split up and got together with some great people they really loved, and got to show me positive examples of that. My grandmother was incredibly important in my upbringing as well. That was my mother's mother, and she'd grown up through the Great Depression and lived through, some quite hard times, and was an athlete herself. I think she scored some ridiculous amount of points as a girls basketball player in Iowa, back when they used to wear skirts and the balls didn't bounce very well. Yeah, they wore skirts when they played. And, she played center, I think, at like 5'8", back in the day. But she was rolling a ball to me when I was just a little tiny kid, and I couldn't even sit up or kneel or anything. So she was rolling a ball back and forth, and, really started working on my hand-eye coordination and things that would help me in the athletic part of my life, from a very kind of early age. And it was really wise too. It stood up to some oil companies in Long Beach that were trying to, drill in some protected wetlands. And she, was one of the few people to stand up in a court hearing and, take the threats that they were saying, like, hey, quiet down, Bonnie Harder. And she's like, no, fuck you. I'm not going to do that. So I learned a bit about, strength of character and strength of will from her. And all my parents are very willed individuals. So, really my story isn't one of those stories of, I had it tough when I was growing up. I was very blessed from the start. And, and some people will take that as a slight. And that's something that I've had to deal with is, oh, you had it so easy and blah, blah, blah. My childhood was so much tougher. And true, yeah, maybe so. A lot of people had a lot of tougher childhoods than I did. But what I always say is it's not where you begin, it's where you finish. And, there's challenges to every aspect. Fortunately, I had 3 older stepbrothers who made sure I didn't get too headstrong and let me know actually where I stood in relation to the rest of the people of the world, as far as from a physical standpoint, et cetera. So having that balance of some older brothers to kind of beat you up a little bit and keep you from getting too cocky, but as well as having, the opportunities to really kind of do and explore what I needed to explore and what I could explore growing up, I think set me off on a very good foot from an early age, no doubt.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it.
Yeah. And then, all right, so when did things get kind of interesting? I would say things got pretty interesting, I guess, around, well, first of all, I guess junior high, you start to kind of grow up and figure some things out a little bit. But that was still just kind of sorting things out, figuring out my place and all that. I was always, from a really young age, I was always interested in writing. And writing has been a passion of mine from the very get-go. I remember, my grandmother again. And by the way, my grandmother, I don't know, most people probably haven't seen, but since this is all about me anyways, I'll try to get this on camera. But I have a tattoo of her on my arm. It's a very good portrait by an artist named Michael Norris. I don't know if you can see that very well. But anyway, she's one of the key figures in my life. But she would sit me on her lap, and we had an old school typewriter, one of the ones you punch out the keys and slide back and forth. And I would dictate stories to her from 2-3 years old, and the stories were always classical medieval romance stories, fresh out of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I don't know where I got those ideas planted in my head, but it just seemed like from the very beginning that was something I was drawn to. And the knight would save the lady from perils and dangers, and I would love dictating that. And as soon as I learned how to write for myself, I was I kept it up and would write stories and poems, and I guess that was kind of unique. I remember from the poetry side of things, and I did a poetry reading at like a 4th grade poetry reading, and everybody was reading Shel Silverstein, and the judges were 6th graders, and so the 6th graders were still liking the Shel Silverstein, and I read a William Blake poem recited a William Blake poem, just The Tiger. It's probably the most famous William Blake poem. But nonetheless, they looked at me like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what is this? How does this make sense? So, and I thought I did a pretty good job, but I got didn't even come close to placing. And I remember seeing one of the poems that won started, I'm hot. I think I'll have a lemonade and sit down in the shade.
That's poetry. There you go.
Yeah. And, and I'm saying, what the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? And be like, shut the fuck up. What are you talking about? But yeah, so, I'd write even poems even from a young age. Really, I was verbally, I started speaking and writing a lot quicker than a lot of people. I think the legend is about my first words. My mother used to say other side when she would change me breastfeeding from one teat to the other. And so the legend is my first words were at, less than a year, somewhere between 6 and 9 months. I barely had the neck strength, but I popped off a tit and I said, other side. I always had a pretty good appetite, which is something that's lasted with me to this day. But on the verbal side of things, things always came easy. And math wasn't a problem, but it wasn't something that I found fun. And that carried on all through my schooling, even through college. I just didn't like doing things that I felt like somebody else could get the exact same answer quicker than me. I was like, why the fuck do I need to do this? Like, I can call up, Jerry, and Jerry can give me the answer even better than me, and it's going to be completely accurate, so it's not something I need to devote my time to. But it does help you think in a certain way, and I do appreciate that to a large degree.
Well, they do say if you like math, you are not a fan of English, and vice versa for some reason.
It's rare that you see experts in both, right?
Right.
Like you don't see, high level, literary geniuses and high level math geniuses generally coinciding. Although it's possible. I mean, you look at someone like Leonardo da Vinci, and he kind of breaks the mold there.
It's possible, but it doesn't happen very often.
No, I think you can name those individuals on a very short list. I think because the type of devotion it takes to really kind of master any field is one aspect. And I think probably there's also just inherent strengths in our brain. We tend to lean one way or another. I don't know too much about the left brain, right brain. I think that might just be kind of a colloquialism, as they're finding that the brain is a lot more intricate than a simple explanation like that. But I think there is something to it, just kind of a way we approach things. One thing I did like, though, was I took a lot of logic classes, and this was in college, and I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but I think logic is the ultimate foundation that you can kind of fall back on in any situation. I think it's the most important thing to learn. And basically, we've all been in these arguments that are really confusing and frustrating because they get emotional. But if you really break it down to the base logic, it can kind of remove all that to the very core. And all of these kind of philosophical explorations, just the way using that logical base, I think, is crucial. You can prove things through logic using the if-then statements. If such and such, then such and such. And as long as the premises are accurate, then the conclusions logically follow. And that's been probably something, that was instilled by my father. It was just a strong, keen sense of logic. So I never approached any subject with a preconceived set of notions that didn't abide by my logic. Like, that was the key. So when, I grew up, by the time I was in high school, I was off here to Texas to go to school, went to Westlake High School here in Texas. And by that point, coming into Texas, there's a lot of Christians out here. And, I was getting invited to these Christian ski trips, and Christian groups all the time. And, my family was more agnostic than anything. Wasn't devout atheist by any means, devoted atheist, not devout, but, or were they practicing religious? But coming here, I was really exposed to some real deal, Christians. And that was interesting because immediately, it just didn't sit with my logic. I was like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. I think this is silly. So, I remember at a ski trip I went to, they have these you ski all day. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's sweet. And then they sit you down for the brainwashing part of it. And I just wasn't having any of it. I was asking questions. They're like, well, that's where faith comes in. I was like, no, wrong. There's a time and a place for faith, but for me, it has to logically make sense. And so, since then, I've come to a lot of synthesis with some Christian belief, and I've kind of taken a bit of everything that I've learned on my own through my own journeys, but I've never just swallowed a wafer of faith and said, yeah, that's good, that's cool. In anything I've done, you can trust reliable sources to a certain degree to kind of lead you on a way, but it has to have that foundation in logic or experience or something before I'll give it any real credibility.
And that's something that your parents taught you as you were growing up, or did you learn that on your own?
It was definitely helpful. It was helped to be instilled in me by my father, in particular, and supported by the rest of my family. But it's something that I've also taken to heart as well. That's something that's been intrinsically a part of me, that the logic has to be sound. And when things get difficult, that's what I fall back on. That's kind of the backbone of who I am, is an intense desire to figure things out through logic. And it doesn't mean, and logic doesn't mean that it has to be scientifically proven. I think you can get too lost on this. Well, that's not proven, I don't believe it. It just has to logically make sense. The internal argument has to make sense, for it to be. It could be anything from Bigfoot to ghosts to whatever. I have to basically back that out and say, what are the logical reasons for this? It's not like I need great evidence. To at least open up the possibility, there has to be that logical base. So if you ask what are the most important things to me, I'd say logic, and then an inherent sense of justice, I think, is also a key aspect to me. And I don't know exactly where I developed that. Certainly my parents had a key aspect of it. But I think part of it, too, was I was never punished in a punitive sort of way. if I did something wrong, my father would explain to me like, hey, this is what you did. These are the consequences. These are the people that felt bad because of it. These are the, animals, environment, et cetera, that was hurt because of this. This was your fault that you did this. And so by explaining the consequences of my actions, my own guilt was the lash that punished me. I was like, oh shit. Like I remember one time I was throwing rocks in the neighbor's pool, and instead of like getting a spanking, I was like, oh, I wonder if I can do it. It was one of those things like, can I reach it?
Right.
Do I have the arm strength to do it? And I'm not really thinking about anything else. And they explained to me like, listen, you realize what has to happen there. Either, the parent or whoever it is, I forget the name of the neighbors, either they're going to have to go wade in the pool and clean out all those rocks by hand, which is going to annoy them. They could be having a tough day. It's going to take time out of their schedule. They're not going to be able to, it's going to put them in a bad mood, which is going to affect their whole family, or they're going to have to pay somebody else to go do that. And it's just going to cost them money. And, that's the cost of what you've done selfishly. And I felt, really bad. And they're like, now you got to go over there and apologize. And learning through that way, I think was key, so in anything that I do, that somehow that played a piece, but I think maybe also I was born with it a little bit because, sitting on my grandma's lap telling stories about knights who basically enforced justice, set the wrongs right, was something that kind of kept me going, and it still keeps me going now. So, if you have to boil down who I am at the very base of things, it's logic and justice. Those are the two things that override all sentiments, from anything from family to relationships to whatever. Those two things I hold more sacred than any other vows that I take. So I think that's kind of a key insight to who I am. And the way that I go about my philosophy is to keep those things in mind. I think what motivates me is the injustice of the ignorance that's out there. People afraid of things that can help them, like the psychedelics, for example. I've explored these with a keen sense of logic. How is this affecting me? How can this help me? How can this help other people? And if you really look at the logic without the fear and the hysteria and the propaganda and the actual effects and the results and the studies that are coming out, the case is overwhelming. But on the other side, you have these other tools that churches have been using for thousands of years and other people, which is fear, guilt, propaganda, misinformation. So I think that's one of the reasons why I've never had any issue with that. I don't accept the morals and of society as a norm, or the laws in particular, if I find them unjust or if I find them to be illogical. And if they're illogical, then they're unjust. Because if they're illogical, then they're punishing people unjustly. There's no other way, because every law has a punitive component. And so I think that's been one of my quests, is to basically set out against injustice in a variety of different ways and use as my sword the tool of logic. And I think that's kind of the key aspect of what I've done.
If you could get like everybody in a room that doesn't really agree with what you're saying, they don't understand, maybe they're just afraid of the unknown, what would you tell them?
Well, I think you'd have to get, I think there's a kind of a systematic approach that you'd have to get. And I think we're talking everybody. So let's say America. Everybody's a little too broad. Everybody has their own thing. But let's say America. Let's say the middle of America, which has some great, intelligent, awesome people, and also has a lot of ignorance. Everywhere has ignorance. There's ignorance on both sides. But I guess it depends. You know what I mean? It depends on what the particular issues are. So like, kind of a fearful Christian conservative, what I would tell them is a little bit different than what I would tell a, more socialist leaning, well-intentioned, but illogical, liberal. You know what I mean? So everybody has their kind of balance where they're, in my view, a little bit off balance, and they're not in alignment with truth, logic, and justice. Like somehow they're skewed a little bit. So if you consider like being in alignment in a straight line, you know, people are bulging out in different sections. So you'd have to push those sections back in, you know, depending on what the issues were. So, you know, if you're in that fearful Christian kind of conservative approach, I think really you have to take them back to logic, because that's the only way to get it back. It's like, okay, what are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of this? Okay, let's say it's marijuana. You know, what are your reasons for despising it, thinking it's illegal, thinking it's warranted and just to throw people in a cage where, you know, for smoking this herb that grows naturally, that, you know, why? What are your reasons? You know, tell me how this is a just law. Tell me why you need to prevent them from doing that they can't make that decision for themselves. And they would have their answers. Well, what their answers would be ultimately would fail the test of logic. And if you sat down with them long enough and actually got them to rid themselves of all the hysteria and fear and actually say, hey, we're going to have a logical debate, you know, then I think you could start to push them back in place. But people are stubborn. You know, it's very difficult to move people. I mean, it would take a huge effort. And at the end of the day, they could just choose to forget it because they don't want to change themselves that much. And that's one of the biggest challenges but ultimately, if you can get people to adopt the system of logic, then I think that's a big step. And on the other side too, you have to say, you know, what are the results of, you know, taxing people 50%, you know, and giving out all these programs, expanding big government, you know, what is actually happening here? You know, it's not your intentions that count. You know, yeah, your intentions are great intentions. Good job with your intentions. You know, you want to help. But where are the logical results of what this is causing and why this is happening? You know, and really get them to kind of look at that and see it. And you just have to kind of push those sides in on both sides. But that's a good question. I mean, and really, I think everybody listening to this podcast has, you know, an opportunity to talk to their friends and talk to their peers and talk to their people who are on the other side of what they think of as the truth. I mean, what Joe Rogan and all of his people associated have done is created like a kind of a hub where, you know, you can go back to get in touch with what I believe to be a large, heavy dose of truth, you know, and from there, you know, hopefully, and there's other areas of truth. It's not like Joe's the only one doing this, but, you know, I've been attracted to the orbit that he's kind of created and then kind of spun my own orbit around. But that's what's got to keep happening. You know, I mean, we got to keep attracting planets, and then those planets got to have their own gravity and keep attracting other people until it expands and kind of spreads like one of those outbreak charts you see in the movies, you know, where you just get a little bit more information. Like I know for sure there are people that are going to be listening to this podcast that do not share my beliefs or Rogan's beliefs. And so hopefully, you know, by the end of it, you know, there'll be a little bit of a weakening in the fortresses and the levees that are kind of holding up some of the ideals that I believe aren't really truly based on anything that is substantial or real or truthful. So yeah, everybody has their own issues, and I think everything can be cured by, you know, and I've said this word probably 700 times already, and I'll try and lay off it, but by bringing everything back in line with just real kind of fundamental, logical, empirical kind of analysis of what is what, without the fear, without the emotions, and without the coloring of the religious kind of fervor that tends to overwhelm people with these thoughts and fears and, you know, scary shit that they think is going to happen to them if they do that, which is all just fucking nonsense.
I mean, it has to be hard, though, to completely strip away your emotions as well when you're thinking solely logical.
It's a challenge. No doubt. it's a particularly a challenge in relationships. I mean, that's when you get generally the most illogical, you know, and so, you know, you'll be in an argument about something that's, you know, if you actually got logical, it would be over in a second, but there's so many emotions involved that it becomes a very convoluted and challenging issue. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a constant effort. And at the same time, you know, I've certainly learned that one of the risks is that you can be a little bit too out of touch with your, you know, being in the moment, just experiencing, feeling the emotional balance. I mean, while logic is incredibly important, there's also something to be said for the non-logical sensations that you feel. You know, a kind of read you get off people, a vibe you get off, energy you get transmitted between two people, and a kind of release of the mind. I think one of the biggest problems that I had, probably up until my Iboga trip, was way too much dominance of my mind. It served me in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it was a significant detriment in that I called the entity Mind Boy, and it was just this almost juvenile machine that was running in my brain that didn't always have my best interest. It wasn't really my true self. It could do fancy things like analyze logic and do that, which was vital, but it overstepped its bounds too many times. You know, it created hypothetical scenarios that I knew intrinsically weren't true and made me fearful of them. It would sabotage certain aspects, you know, kind of what Stephen Pressfield calls resistance, or calls the enemy in his latest book, Turning Pro. That comes from the mind, in my opinion. You know, the mind is not always in a line with what our real true selves want for ourselves. So that is a risk, and it is a caveat. You know, you have to strike the balance. Everything is truly about balance, but you have to hone the skills of logic, and you have to have a sense of justice, which is, you know, what is the harm, what is the good, and just weigh them on two hands like the scales. You know, harm versus good. You want to maximize the good, minimize the harm. You know, and anything that's out of balance in that, like throwing someone in jail for smoking a joint, harm, fuck yes. You know, harms the economy, harms the person, harm all kinds of harms. You know, good. Where's the good in that? You prevented somebody from getting the munchies, feeling good, laughing. Like, what? Like, how is that? The scale is so far out of balance, you know? But somehow it's allowed to propagate, because what they've done is, on that side, they've piled on fears and propaganda and misinformation and concerns that just aren't real. They're phantom weights, you know? So the scale to these people looks skewed in one area, but really the weights that they put on that scale of justice were just ghosts. You know, there was nothing there. So I guess I've kind of botched my chronological discussion of where we've gone, but I think high school was kind of interesting. I was mostly focused on being an athlete when I was in high school. I mean, that was the key thing that I was focused on, and I think sports are crucial, you know, for any kid, male or female, because it puts you in pressure situations and requires you to dig deep, you know. And I think that is probably the most important thing you can fall back on, is just knowing what you're made of when you're put to the test. And where else do you get that as a kid? You know, not really too much. Your parents are paying the bills, you know, things are pretty easy. Maybe you got your own job, but you're still living at your parents' house. So it's mostly, you know, spending money, maybe a car payment. I mean, sure, some people had thrust. I was thrust into the fucking on my own at age 7. And I was killing squirrels and cooking them on spits and whatever. I mean, so some cases are like that. I'm not saying that didn't happen. But for the most part, you know, unless you are playing a sport, you're just not going to be exposed to those kind of pressure situations where you have expectations of those around you. I mean, I remember playing basketball my first time. I got brought up to varsity as a sophomore, and I was brought into the game basically to shoot a three-pointer. And if I made it, the first one, I would get to play more of that game. If I missed it, I would sit right the fuck back down and go back down to JV, right? And there's a couple thousand people in the stands. It was a big year. We had couple, a soon-to-be NBA player on our team. And I remember, just the amount of pressure that you feel at that point, you just couldn't duplicate that in any other situation as a 15, 16-year-old kid. And fortunately, for whatever reason, I was able to come through in that. And I remember, the ball swinging to my side, and nobody in the stands hardly knew who I was. I was brought up for this game, and I knew that every single thing was riding on that one shot, and was able to take the shot and make it, which then set me off to play, varsity for the rest of that year and have an experience playing basketball that I wouldn't have gotten any other time in my career. I mean, we were able to play in some national tournaments, play against some really top-ranked schools and players, had a top 25 nationwide ranking, and I wouldn't have been a part of that if that didn't happen. And but the most important part of that was just the pressure that I was able to go through. Fortunately, it worked out well for me, but if it didn't, I would have to learn from that. I'd have to learn, how I could better prepare and handle that, so that next time I was in that pressure situation, I could succeed. So that was a huge part of what was going on in high school. I was fucking clueless with females, though. Like I was terrible. And I think that's a kind of interesting game when you're younger as well. And I think it's, was the subject of a lot of emotional angst, and it continued till I was probably 21, 22. And, part of the problem with my kind of chivalrous attitude was I wasn't treating the girls the same way I would treat a buddy. You know what I mean? Like I'm always going to be chivalrous and kind and a good guy. Like I can't be a bad guy. Like it's just not part of me, nor would I ever do that. But what my problem was is that I forgot that when I'm with my friends and I'm interesting, I'm cracking jokes, I'm busting their balls a little bit, I'm having fun. I'm not just looking at them and smiling like a goof, and that was the problem. I remember going on some dates in college, and I would just sit and just smile at them. What a weirdo.
Wow, that sounds entertaining.
Yeah, no. And I would, but no, when I was out with my buddies, I was making fun of them, and we were teasing each other, we were laughing, but I think I had this idea of just being, I don't know, some whack idea in my head that, I think ultimately it's not about playing games or being anything different, but you just got to basically, I know we got a question on Twitter about this, and I think one of the biggest things I've learned is you can't change who you are, to fit somebody else's, to try and fit what you think they're going to like. Act like they're one of your buddies, and a guy or a girl, treat them like you would one of your buddies. Be yourself, be fun, and just keep your own swag, whatever your swag is. You got to make sure you keep that intact.
Yeah, but you always have to be sweet too.
Yeah,
there's a balance there.
You have to be
We
sweet.
don't want to be one of the dudes all the time.
That's true. I think that's a good point. But that comes later though. You can't come out of the gate like that, because I did that. I came out of the gate just all smile. I would give flowers like right off the bat, like way early. You know what I mean? And there's a time and a place for all that. I love a great romantic gesture. I'm all for it. I mean, I write poetry, for fucking God's sakes. You know what I mean? So, but don't forget, I guess my only advice would be just, they're not, don't treat anybody like a different species.
Right.
Be good to all people. Be good to your girl like you be good to your friends. But don't be afraid to have some laughs and enjoy it. But I think so that was kind of that was a big kind of struggle for me. I mean, I never got a girl that I really wanted or liked until I was probably 21 or 22. I'd get the ones that I didn't really like. Why? Because I treated them like I would everybody else. Just cool, friendly, fun, like, oh, hey, what's up? And whereas the girls I liked, I'd be like, hey, with a big smile. So
What changed in you? What made you
I
all of
think
a sudden realize?
I think I just figured, I think it was actually, all right, so it was this one girl in particular I dated. And she was a sportscaster and a variety of other things. And she was a great girl, really cool. But for some reason, I just wasn't that into it. Like, I just wasn't that into it. And as I said, there's no rhyme or maybe great reason about it. But the fact that I wasn't that into it, she was like super into me. And I was like, whoa.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah. I was like, whoa, how about that? And that's where I kind of learned, like, hey, what is how I'm treating this? How is how I'm treating this girl different? Well, I'm still being good, I'm still being a good person, but I'm just treating her like I would in any one of my other normal friends, and that's from there. And I think learning that was kind of a key for me in the relationships. And then from there, I got ensnared in a relationship that had some, certainly toxic elements. And I think one of the key things you have to keep in mind is to be wary of relationships that prey on insecurities. It's the moment that you feel a relationship exacerbating any kind of insecurity, I think that's when you got to get the fuck out, on either side. Or fix it immediately, because insecurity is a poison that will kill any kind of situation. And there was one relationship that was kind of preying on some of my insecurities, and it caused way unnecessary grief. I remember it was just a back and forth in and out of this relationship, but she had some hooks into some deep insecurities of mine that I wasn't old enough to overcome. And, and it was a really kind of shitty situation that was able to do that. So I put up with so much more than I ever would have, because I was trying to overcome something. I was trying to prove to her that I was a certain way, and prove to myself more than prove to her that, how she made me feel was wrong. She was the kind of girl who, like, we would split up for a minute and she would be dating a professional linebacker for a pro football team in a second. I'm like, fuck, so I'd hit the weight room and I'd be like, oh, I could be as big and bad as this guy, but that's silly, silly. Like, okay, she wants to date, the middle linebacker, good for her. But it's hard when you're that young. And if you feel insecurities, that's going to be a disaster too, because you're going to stifle who you're with and prevent them from being the person that they could be. Now, you also have to be wary of the games where one person is going to try and make you jealous, try and make you insecure, which is a sign of their own insecurity. It's one thing, there's a big difference, and you see it when you go out. There's a big difference of the girl in the relationship. Let's say there's a relationship. She goes out, she stands up on a table, and she just fucking dances. Why? Because she loves dancing, and she's feeling it. She likes the whole environment, the spotlight, everything about it. And that's really what she's thinking. And to me, that's fucking awesome. I love that. But there's the other girl that you see who is, standing up on the table, making eyes with some guys, checking out their boyfriend. Hey, is he watching? Is he watching me do this? And that's fucked up. You can't, that's another thing where you start to see these kind of poisonous elements arise. So, I think the key is just, once you're in the relationship, kill that insecurity. You got to just kill it. You got to have that self-love, that self-confidence, that self-pride to never be in a situation where you find that. So what do you think about all that? Do you think I'm on the pace? What's the female perspective there for the relationship talk?
No, I think you're definitely on pace. I've been in my fair share of relationships where insecurities completely ruined it, but you stay in there, like you were saying, just because to prove the other person wrong. And I think it's important to remind yourself, or to be able to tell when someone's playing games with you. I think it's fairly easy too.
Yeah.
Because they give off the signs right in front of your face, and either you decide to ignore them, or you realize what is happening and fix it, or just get out.
Yep. I think that's right. I think people see things, but when the hooks are in, even if you see it,
You don't want to believe it. You stay.
You stay. You make up rationalizations. You make up excuses.
And you know you're wrong. You sit there and you know exactly what's going on, and you know you're wrong.
Yeah.
But you stay.
Yeah.
Until finally you grow some balls, I guess, and get out.
Yeah. And that was, so as far as growing some balls and getting out, that was another good thing that my father taught me from early on. He said, son, you have a right to your own happiness. And that was, you know, probably one of the most important things for me to learn in any relationship is, you know, it's hard to break up a lot of times with somebody because you're worried about their feelings. Like, how are they going to feel? You know, it's going to crush them. They're going to be so sad. So you stay in relationships that you shouldn't because you're worried about that. But at the fundamental core, you have a right to your own happiness. And I would even take it farther. I would say you have an obligation to your own happiness. Because if you're unhappy, then the resentment is going to start to build. And resentment is like a pool of tar in the ocean. You know, it's just going to stay there and maybe dissipate, and it's going to kill the fucking fish. I mean, everything that's good about, you know, it's just going to blacken and darken with its ochre poison, you know. So if you're not happy, that's what's going to build. And so it can't work. You know, it just can't. You're not sparing anything. You're just dragging it out and making it worse at the end of the day. So, you know, be kind, be sensitive, be reasonable. But at the end of the day, you have a right and an obligation to pursue your own happiness. And I think, you know, as the Cliff Notes, I think those are the most important things to think about. You know, avoid insecurity. And I think honesty is a big one, too. You know, I think that's, it's difficult to be fully honest, you know, to go to 100%. But it's very valuable when you do, because it's a huge stress relief. And, you know, I mean, carrying around some actions or some thoughts or some deeds, it's tough. It's a burden. It's a backpack. You know, it's a weight that's constantly on you. And the more you can get rid of that, the better. It's challenging, though, because most people, you know, aren't cool with facts about us as human beings. And they have insecurities and a variety of different things. I mean, and being honest isn't being insensitive. You know what I'm saying? But that's a whole different thing, you know, being like crude and, you know, like for the example, let's say a beautiful girl walks by and you're in a relationship and you're with your girl. You know, if you look at that girl and then just kind of, you know, look back and go back to your conversation, there in that situation, that's just human nature. That's just straight up human nature. So the person you're with should be like, that's human nature. He's a fucking primate, you know? His instincts are saying, look, a nubile female, you know, hark, here she approaches. Where is the alpha male defending her? Aha, there is none. You know, or if she's with one, it's like, hark, the alpha. Am I more alpha? You know, like that is the instinctual, you know, backstory to what you're kind of seeing. And it plays out very quickly, but that's what our instincts are saying. And I think females oftentimes fail to recognize, like, hey, he's got to deal with that. You know, that's something that's coming from a deep, deep place, you know, where he was dragging his knuckles and pounding his chest. And, you know, all that DNA is still inside of us. But at the same time, that guy who oversteps his bounds and is so dominant in a relationship that he goes, that girl's fucking hot, you know, like, and I've been in that situation, you know, where I've seen other people do that. And I'm like, no, that's not cool. That's just going to mash your girl down, you know, have her bottle up some more further insecurities about your situation. So whereas she should acknowledge that it's, you know, you noticed her because you're a primate and a man, you know, you should have the courtesy and the chivalry to just shut your fucking mouth about it and just go on and love your girl, and it's not a big deal. You know, so I think there's a kind of mutual give and take, and I think a lot of that is part of the, you know, part of being honest. You know, I think you need to find a partnership where you don't have to hide the stuff that makes you you. You know, you don't have to pretend that you never masturbate even when you're in a relationship. Like, cool, it's good, you know, like it happens. You know, you got to take care of your needs every once in a while. You know, we're not Dr. Phil here, who's who's I had a great talk with Joe Rogan about Dr. Phil, and he was saying he saw him many years ago, and Dr. Phil was giving advice to this woman who had a husband who was watching pornography and masturbating. And he said, well, beating is the same as cheating. Beating is the same as cheating. When he's watching that pornography, it's like he's in there in the room with another woman. What the fuck are you talking about? You know what I mean? So that's crazy. And I think spreading those kind of beliefs is just toxic. You know, I mean, it's, I think there are problems with pornography. You know, I work for Fleshlight, which is a male sex toy company. So I was tangentially, in that industry. And there's a lot of issues, and there's nothing less sexy about porn than actually when you get to know the porn stars and see it. I mean, it's completely unattractive. Like, you think the AVN show is cool? You know, AVN show is not cool. I'd rather go to a fucking copy machine trade show than the AVN show. It's fucking horrible. Like, people think, oh, that's awesome. There's porn stars everywhere. I'm going to go there. No, don't fucking go there. Like, it's terrible. It's the worst time in Vegas. But, you know, I mean, it's, and I know most of the people listening to me aren't going to believe me when I say that, but, you know, if you experienced it a couple times, you'd have to agree. So I'm not exonerating pornography and saying pornography is great. It has its own issues. I think one of the main issues is it kind of saps your desire to go out and change your own circumstances. You know, I mean, if you're constantly fulfilling all your fantasies virtually, well, then you're going to have less energy, less zest, less zeal to go out and fulfill your fantasies in real life. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think that's bad. I think that's also, you know, I was big into the role-playing games to a certain degree, not like some of the kids now. I mean, the games now are so immersive, but I played my Dragon Warrior and my Final Fantasy when I was growing up, and it creates this kind of virtual achievement world, a virtual fulfillment of your goals, which is cool, which is fun. But taken too far, it's going to lessen your zest and zeal to improve your real life character. You know, to go out and to lift your weights, to improve your strength. You're like, oh, my fucking dragon shaman warrior knight lizard just got +3 strength. You know, I was like, or you could do some kettlebells and get your fucking real self +3 strength, you know, and see how that works. Or read your book and get some more skills or some more intelligence. So same with pornography. You know, you're fulfilling these crazy fantasies. Well, why don't you go out, be successful, work harder, work out more, become more interesting, and go fucking live that. You know, go be that. You know, go be a rock star if you want to do that. Go do it. So I think that's a major problem with it. But it's not like Dr. Phil where you're in there. Beating is the same as cheating. But anyways, I know Dr. Phil has a certain strange appeal to people, which, you know, someday perhaps I'll figure out. But I don't know about that.
Oh, Dr. Phil.
But anyway, so. All right, so I guess that we've kind of covered a bit in high school, and so I think some of my exposure to the Christian element, I started to get I started to see some of the negative effects of that. I started to see some good kids, good friends who were just racked with guilt all the time. Oh, I made out with this girl at this party. It's so sinful. I'm gonna get punished. I was like, no, dude, it was cool. You know, you guys are both cool, and you had a little, you know, drunken fumble. Who gives a fuck? You know, like, why are you so upset? And so
that's sad that they feel guilty about it.
Totally. And I also had another situation where, you know, a girl who had an early boyfriend who took her virginity and then was like, oh my God, you're a whore. I can't believe you did this. This is such a sin. We're not even married. You're a whore. Blah, blah, blah.
But he was involved in the act.
Yeah. So imagine how much that fucked this girl up. You know, she was like wrecked, you know, from that. Imagine the very first time you give your virginity to a man. Immediately he finishes. He comes. Probably wasn't even good anyways. And he's like, oh my God, you're a fucking whore. I can't believe you tempted me to do this. Blah, 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 you fucking whore. Can you imagine that? You know? But that's what this kind of fear system creates. You know, and so I started to get bitter towards religion, and that kind of really culminated and peaked in college. So I kind of, you know, I wrapped up my athletic career in high school, and you know, was doing some writing and stuff. But I really started to become philosophically more active when I got to college. I went to University of Richmond, and which was a cool school, a good school off in Richmond, Virginia. Kind of a small school, but was able to take some really good classes, and I focused when I got there on philosophy, classical civilization, and then did some economics and some English. And I'm glad I did. The philosophy I really kind of focused on was philosophy of religion. And that really gave a pretty good fundamental view of general, what kind of formed my kind of religious backbone as far as what every other religion was doing, what parts of it I liked. And it was just, we were able to explore it with a real logical approach. Is there a God? How do we know? What evidence is there on both sides? And some of this you never really fully figure out. There's arguments on both sides, but you're exploring it. You're looking at it from a logical standpoint. And then the other question is this God worthy of worship? And what I found is that rarely in there was a report of a God from a monotheistic point of view that abided by what I thought was my sense of justice. The Old Testament Jehovah was not just. Fuck that. I mean, he was punishing people for doing things that were inherently natural in their being with death and flooding the world and causing massive cataclysms. I mean, if God was a person able to do that, we'd be like, this is a fucking tyrant. This is Lex Luthor. This is Superman's nemesis. So, in that aspect, that God was not worthy of worship, and so, and there's a bunch of different ways to look at it. And that was a really kind of key element. But I was still pretty seething. I was still pretty angry at that point. I wasn't maybe Christopher Hitchens angry, but if anybody's read that book, he wrote a book called God Is Not Great, and you can just taste the bitterness in every page of that book. I mean, shit, even the title, God Is Not Great. That book is a little intense. And this was before the days of Kindle, so when I was reading that book, I tried to bring it on a plane once, and I didn't even have the courage to get it out of my bag when I was finishing it. But some of the other good books, Bertrand Russell writes a good book, Why I'm Not a Christian. But some of the best books are by actually a preacher named John Shelby Spong, and he writes some books. He wrote a book called Why Christianity Must Change or Die, and he approached it from a very logical standpoint, and has kind of helped kind of push that in line. But really, for me, when I started to soften on the subject was when I started to explore some shamanic activities. And I wrote a blog about this called The Real Heaven and Hell. And, I guess I'll start at the beginning now that we're on the topic of shamanism and we're, kind of closing down to my guideline for an hour here. We may have to continue this podcast or run a little late, but... my first shamanic experience, I went out and saw a shaman down in New Mexico, and trained in a lot of the traditional ways, Native American ways, and brewed a tea, and the tea consisted of, it was psilocybin mushroom tea, and I knew a little bit about what I was getting into, but I didn't really know too much else about it. And I remember that first experience I had was probably one of the most significant experiences of my life, for sure.
Well, what made you go and try it before we get into it?
What was it? I think I'd had some encouragement from my father, and he was just kind of getting a little bit of experience in that himself. And he started to see the benefit. And I was always something of an adventurer myself, and I did my own research on, at that point, this was only probably 10 years ago. So, the interwebs were live, and there was a good resource at arrowid.org, which has a bunch of trip reports and things. And so I kind of knew that it was going to be psilocybin, though I didn't know for sure. The shaman kind of had her own way of handling things. Read some reports, talked to some people, and I actually had some buddies who had done it as well. Not too many though, back then. It was more rare because I was, more an athlete, and, it just didn't have the broadest circle that I do now. Yeah, but that was pretty much it. It was just kind of adventurous spirit and kind of an idea to learn more and explore, and just kind of took a chance, took a gamble, and was rewarded immensely. And that first experience, basically I remember taking it, and within a couple hours, I remember my spirit actually lifting from my body and hovering over myself. And my breathing stopped, my flesh just completely melted away. I had absolutely no sensation in my body at all. Zero. It was gone. My body was invisible, dark, completely sensationless, gone. And my consciousness was alone. And at that moment, I remember thinking so much more clearly than I ever had in my life. Everything was just crystal clear, sharp. And I remember looking back and reflecting on my body and thinking, holy shit, these two things, while they're linked together, they're just basically paperclipped together. They're not the same thing. The consciousness, the soul, if you will, is distinct from the body. So at that point, I realized that, what I was experiencing, there was no book for it. There was no guide for it. This was, yes, the soul exists, but, everywhere else that talks about a soul packs in a bunch of other shit too. Like Christianity is happy to talk about the soul, but they also talk about you burning that soul in a bit of, in some oil, or getting gnawed on by demons or whatever nonsense it is. But at that point, that was a real relief, because at that point, it liberated me from any fear of death. And I think that's one of the most overwhelming fears that we all have, is a fear of dying. And at the point where you fully realize that your body is distinct, your consciousness, your soul is distinct from your body, then there's nothing to fear about death. Death would just be a shame. It would mean that you'd have to start all over again. And I wasn't sure on the reincarnation thing, and I'm not necessarily completely sure now, although the answers I got during my Iboga experience were pretty clear cut, that yes, there is reincarnation. But what I do know is that the soul exists, and where it goes, I'm not dead sure. A lot of this is just my best logical explanations. But what I'm sure of, because I experienced it, is the soul exists, and it's distinct to the body. The body is just a vessel that allows us to experience the magic that you cannot experience in the non-physical. You can't experience the pleasures of the sensations and the awes and the wonder, and you can only experience that in not only a physical life, but a transient physical life, a life that has an expiration. And I think that's the gift that we get with these beings: a chance to improve, a chance to grow, and a chance to experience the magic of life. So no need to fear death, because where you're going is another place. It's as real. Maybe it's not physical, but it's real, and it exists, and your identity is intact. And my inclination is that you do get to come back and try again another time. But in order not to spoil it and hasten your way home, you have to forget everything that you knew from the non-physical world. It's just the way it works. But you can start to kind of cheat the system a little bit by doing things like psychedelics, and I think you're supposed to a certain degree. It's just siphon a little bit more wisdom from the other side to help you in this life. In a very recent experience I had, I remember, being close to crossing over to the other side, and I couldn't cross the threshold. But I remember feeling a sense of almost a little naughtiness, like I was exploring an area that is usually off limits to humans, but that naughtiness came only from my own mind. It was almost like, ooh, I'm over on the other side. Hey, and that sounded like I was going gay on the other side.
A little bit.
But I was like, basically like, I was able to come real close and gather wisdom from that. But that's important, because the traditions that have taught that are gone. So not completely gone, they still exist. There's still some unbroken traditions in the Amazon and in Peru and Some of the Indian, indigenous cultures, and some of the other spiritual traditions are still intact. But as from a general cultural perspective, that's gone. And it's up to us to kind of explore that and bring some of our wisdoms back. So that was a key experience. And then in a repeat experience, I realized that when you cross over to the other side, that is, you basically look back on your life with a crystal clarity as to, and this might have actually been the same experience. I did a couple pretty recently, but this might have been the same one where I synthesized that, at the point where your spirit is out of your body, you have perfect clarity on the life that you've lived. And if you've lived well, and if you've lived good, and if you've loved, and if you've experienced life to the best that you possibly can, sure, you've made some mistakes, but you've always done it, put your heart in the right place in everything you've done. That's going to be a heaven of sorts. You're going to look back and smile at your life and be welcomed back to the, to the spirit realm and prepare for another journey or hang out. I don't know what happens there, but it's going to be a heaven of sorts. But if you've lived wickedly, and if you've done wrong, and if you've used rationalizations to why you hit this girl, or why you, beat your children, or why you did whatever, cheated these people out of their money, you're going to look back on that, and you're going to have no blinders and no shields from that guilt. It's going to be like a horror movie where they pin your eyes open, and you have to look at every different consequence of every action that you've done, and you're going to be in hell. Mm-hmm. And that is a real hell. I mean, that's as painful as any Hieronymus Bosch painting of hellfire and brimstone and demons, because it's going to be that self-inflicted, inescapable guilt. But at a certain point, there will come forgiveness, and that's where I think, when you've atoned, basically feel like you've, I don't know how it works, but I'm sure that at a certain point, you don't self-punish yourself forever. At a certain point, a forgiveness comes, and you release yourself of your actions, acknowledging their failures, and go on after a certain amount of pain. And so that's where I started to get a synthesis with some of the Christian beliefs. There is a hell, there is a heaven, there is forgiveness at a certain level, but they got it just all backwards and all fucked up. But the fact that there was that much, it kind of took the edge off. It took the Christopher Hitchens, venom off of my attacks on Christianity. And I just think that it's just been misguided and misused for power purposes. But so that was, really powerful gifts early on that kind of led me on my path. And having those initial early powerful results, the next step was just, whoa, what else could I learn? What do these other medicines have to teach me? And that's what kind of set me off on the path of the Warrior Poet path, where I'm exploring different psychedelics, learning the medicines I have. I also realized I had a pretty unique ability to remember everything that happened during my experience. Even a lot of people, especially with the Iboga experience, like you read, famous author and amazing man, Graham Hancock, you read his experience with Iboga, and he was saying, very difficult to quantify exactly what was happening. A lot of things were going on. I've never had that situation where things were complicated to elucidate. And I think that was maybe some part of my purpose, is to, be able to go over to the other side and maintain consciousness so that I can bring the wisdom back and explain it in a good way. And I think that's, probably why a lot of the people are listening to this podcast now, is because I've made an impact in the way that I've been able to relay the information from a confusing and foreign place and have it colorful and have it make some sense. So, and I think that'll continue to be, part of my path, is to find the wisdom from the other side, help to bring it back, and help other people find it themselves. Because, as I said, human beings are stubborn individuals. You could listen to me. I could be in a room with somebody for, a full week, and we could talk everything out. And I'm pretty confident I could get to agreement at the end of the week. They're like, you know what, Aubrey? I fucking agree with you. Like, enough. I really agree with you. And I'd be like, you sure? What else? And I'd shut it down, and I'd get to the logical root of it. And after a week, they'd be like, all right, I totally agree with Aubrey. And then a week later, they'll be like, yeah, yeah, Aubrey had some good points. And then, a month later, they're like, yeah, I chatted with Aubrey, he had some interesting things. And then 6 months later, they may be fully back to themselves again, and just not, unless you really see it for yourself, it's not gonna make an impact. And the shamans know that. Most of the good shamans aren't going to talk to you a lot. They're just going to show you, because they know that their talking is not going to do that much good. So, I think people do need to experience it for themselves. Now, obviously, there's caveats and there's warnings. There was recently the death of that kid, Kyle Nolan. He went down to Peru, went with a shaman, and ended up having that shaman burying him and covering it up. Now, what happened in between? Man, I mean, a lot of speculation there. I do know that the shamans that I've spoken to have had, generations, countless generations spanning back hundreds and hundreds of years, and have never had a death, never even had a permanent or any kind of serious injurious effect from the administration of ayahuasca. So it's very curious. But they also, know how to stress what they call the dieta, the diet. And they make sure that you aren't taking any other kind of pharmaceuticals, that you haven't had certain foods. The Church of Santo Daime, or the EDV Church, they're not even so big on the diet. The diet isn't even that dangerous. But if you are taking some kind of pharmaceutical medication before ayahuasca has a powerful MAOI. And there could be an interaction there between, especially an SSRI, like an antidepressant, and that MAOI. Could be highly dangerous. So preparation, and also knowing the shaman. I've heard stories of shamans who serving false brews, brews of poisonous plants rather than ayahuasca, that make you purge, make you see things just from the fucking sheer poison of it, but aren't really ayahuasca. They're cheaper, easier to make, and don't take the kind of effort of boiling these plants and proper preparation and doing the whole deal. That could be an issue, or, could be a lightning strike. Everything could have been done right. But the fact that the shaman tried to cover it up, and there's some real issues there. And another thing that I'm confident on, every time I've been released from a ceremony, these shamans had looked at me and looked through me, like scanning me like an X-ray machine, and making sure that I'm okay. And you can just tell that they can sense every aspect of it. And then they'll close the ceremony. The shamans, the dragon maestro Orlando Chuandama, he closes the ceremony with either cinnamon or tobacco, and he blows that on you. And you just know that when he gives you that once over and that okay, that you're going to be fine.
You're going to be okay.
Yeah. Somehow something went wrong.
Well, what about people that, maybe don't have you to come to and ask about shamans? What resources do they have? How should they find out if it's safe, or who they should go to?
It's tough. I think you have to talk to some people who've been there. Get on the forums, get on the boards, talk to some people who've actually been to these shamans. If you can't do that, then you have to, certainly you shouldn't go there alone. Step A. And also, especially if you're a female, definitely don't go down to these shamans alone. There's been some, certain reports. Well, this is the first report of any death I've ever heard, or anybody's ever heard. There certainly has been some reports of shamans taking advantage of females who were going through the ceremonies in a sexual way. And really, it's an interesting topic because, these shamans come from a culture where they were basically the mini untouchable kings of their tribe. If they wanted to hook up with a girl, they just did, and the girl was cool with it. So it doesn't justify what they're doing by any means. No, they haven't adopted to our morality, so they're completely unjust. But that's kind of the mentality that some of them have allowed, which allows them to do this. It's like, I'm the shaman, I'm the king, and they can get very headstrong if they're not good. They can get very puffed up on their own, their own self and their own self-importance, because they are doing great things. But if they lose their sense of humility, it can be a major issue. So if you don't have, a resource that I pointed you in, I'd say you talk to people who've been there, and also definitely watch what's going on first. Unless you're completely 100% sure, watch a few ceremonies that go down. Just be like, would you mind if I join the ceremony quietly and watch? And if they say no, fuck them, get out of there. Take your business elsewhere. But if you are going to do ayahuasca, I have a couple excellent resources. If they're too busy or they can't work, try and reach out to them anyways and see if they have a recommendation. Both Javier Zavala and Maestro Orlando Chuandama are both outstanding shamans, and they'll certainly be able to help you. So fortunately for the people listening here, you do have a good resource. I've been there, I've done it, I've known them, and I've seen what they can do, and I have a lot of confidence in recommending them. But there's a lot of other things out there, and you're going to have to use everything you have to use logic and intuition and keen observation and a sense of things to kind of figure it out. And if you do, it can be an amazingly powerful gift, healing both physically and mentally, and bringing back wisdoms that'll help you for the rest of their life, like the wisdoms that I've brought. Every single medicine I've done has given me something that's invaluable in my life. So yeah, I think that set me on the path. And then from there, I have other podcasts and other things where I talk about my specific experiences. I don't think I'm going to go into too much of that from there. But one area I want to touch on is, the career side of things, because that was, I've kind of been focused on the philosophy side of things. But from a career standpoint, that was always something that was very challenging for me, because I had no idea what the fuck I wanted to do when I was in college. I had an idea that I wanted to, A, make some good money, and B, help people. And that was really the key two things that I wanted to focus on. How am I going to make money, and how am I going to do it in something that I enjoy and that also is beneficial to people? Like if I could develop a new fucking cigarette, that wasn't going to cut it. Yeah, maybe I could make some money, but it's going to be hurting people. That didn't kind of sit with me. So, I think the best advice to kind of keep in mind for that is work on honing your own skill set. Work on becoming impeccable as a person and being ready for opportunity, being ready for when you realize what that thing might be. So even if you don't know, practice being great, practice being successful. Take little projects and see them through to the end. So you practice completing projects, practice completing all these things. And, I think that's basically what I did. I started a marketing company after college, and, got to practice how to help companies be successul when it wasn't my own dollars. And then also practice, I worked in some investment banking stuff, helping raise money. So I got to practice raising money when it wasn't my business plan, and just got to kind of feel out a bunch of different industries. Obviously working for Fleshlight was, a huge benefit and a blessing, because I was able to really kind of interact with a large customer base on an e-commerce level. Certainly the product wasn't something that I was particularly enthusiastic about it, but I did see the need for it, and it made sense, and so, but I always kind of had a keen eye that ultimately I wanted to bring something better, something with a more positive message, something that would help people, and something that could build kind of a little platform from which I could reach more people. And, three kind of things came together to make this possible. One, I had the marketing background. The second thing was I had grown up, my stepmother was a, pretty famous nutraceutical doctor, had worked with the LA Lakers, now works with the Miami Heat a little bit, and a bunch of pro athletes and celebrities. Kent Steffes, the volleyball player, all these people were coming in and out. And so she was highly tuned to treating athletes with natural medicines. So myself, I was also getting a lot of the benefit of that as well. If I was really sick and I wasn't able to play and it was a playoff game, I got a B12 shot, ready for me right in. And I could feel the results like, oh, snap, B12, holy shit, this stuff works. So I got to kind of feel what these vitamins and these different kind of foods, how they impacted myself. So I had a kind of an affinity for that as well. But then the final piece was, meeting Joe Rogan and becoming business, partners in business with him, because he had not only very similar values to me. I mean, and then for those of you who, the relationship with me and Joe Rogan is something that's completely unique on a business level. Usually, even amongst business partners, you're somewhere in the 90% honest range if it's good. But you fudge a little bit here and there, you fudge a little bit here and there. With Joe, it's not the way it works. It's fucking straight up 100% all the time. And that's how we try to be in everything with our customers, with that. And so because we see eye to eye on that, it's easy, it makes sense. And then, he's able to help get the message out there, and we just tell it like it is as much as we can. And we can all the time. There's really no reason why you can't, unless it's some kind of sensitive information or some other weird situation. But it's just this complete transparency, complete honesty, which is really unique and really cool. And so having a partner like that has been, such an immense blessing, both for me personally and professionally. And so having all the three of those things come together, the key then was just to make the best fucking products we could. And we tested them out, tried everything we could. And, we knew we were onto something with Alpha Brain early, even though we went through 6 or 7 formulations before we got the first commercial batch. But we knew we had something good. And from there, we've just tried to keep it up and keep doing the best thing we could. I mean, I had some other supplements for Onnit prior to Rogan, but I almost consider that like a different business. It got me to learn who to manufacture, what capsules to make, blah, 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 how some certain things worked. But really the business fully began as Onnit when Joe came on board. And then from there, expanding into fitness, and now expanding into functional foods. Hopefully we're just going to be a real ally on, I see Onnit as the ally on the physical level to help people on the physical level, while, Warrior Poet and everything that Rogan is doing, and from a philosophical and spiritual level, is going to help out as well. So, it's really truly me getting to fulfill my dream of helping people and, still building a bigger and bigger platform. Onnit can take care of your physical needs to a large degree, make sure that you're optimized with the nutrients you need, the fitness equipment that you need, not need, or just need maybe is the wrong word, but that you could utilize as a tool in your bag to improve yourself, to give yourself that +3 strength and +3 intelligence, like you were a video game character. And then, everything I'm exploring on the psychedelic front and on, with the Warrior Poet, just from the philosophy in general, can help people live, hopefully happier and more spiritually fulfilled. And, that's the fucking dream. That's it. I mean, I feel incredibly blessed. And it's not that things aren't challenging and that I walk around with a big smile on my face all the time, because, I have my own demons, I have my own struggles. We have our own challenges. But you just got to keep your backbone intact. Remember what's important to you, truth, honesty, justice, and being in line with, the best logical action to take, and you'll find your way out of the woods eventually, no matter what it is, health challenge, physical challenge, business challenge. And then, just not forgetting to enjoy life as well in the struggle. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the struggle. I have my first important tattoo, which I don't know if anybody's seen. We'll have another tattoo exploration here. But you're probably not going to be able to see this very well. But it's a samurai with the cherry blossom tree. And the symbolism for that is the samurai, to me, represents the struggle and the fight and the desire. Samurai means to serve in Japanese. And to serve a code, to live by a bushido, live by a code of honor. And the cherry blossom tree represents, to not forget about the transient beauty in life. Those are the two elements. Don't get so caught up in the struggle that you forget to, enjoy the falling petals of the cherry blossom, which is kind of, to the Japanese culture, was the embodiment of that kind of philosophy. So that's, man, I've been all over the fucking place here.
I know. It's good, though. It's
been
good.
all over the place. But I think hopefully that gives kind of a little better picture of, where I come from and kind of what makes me tick and what makes me who I am.
I think it definitely does.
Do you have any, are there any other questions you saw from Twitter or anything that,
Yeah, there's so many more questions, but I know we're already past our time.
Yeah, people can hang out a little longer. This will be a special edition. We'll call it the 90-minute special edition. So let's say we got about another 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, first, what I want to touch on is go back. You studied philosophy at the University of Richmond, but then you went into marketing. So what is that little gap? What happened in between graduation and starting your marketing company?
Philosophy was a way to teach you how to think. And to me, that was what I could apply to any other field. So I didn't know what I was going to do at that point. I had no clue, like literally no clue what I was going to do. I might have gone into finance. I might have gone into whatever else. But I knew how to think, and I knew how to problem solve. So I knew I could apply that skill set to whatever particular information was necessary to succeed. I ended up applying that to marketing. And so that's relating to different people, quantitative analysis of data, and then inspiration and creativity. And marketing for me kind of embodied a lot of those things. The life of a writer was something I explored, but it's such a solitary life. It's, you and your words and your books. And there'll be a time for that, but it wasn't that time. I wanted to be out there in the world and doing things. The finance world was just too boxed in, too rigid. There was not enough room for creativity and exploration and brilliance. And it was more like, you just grind your way, grind, hours. The people in New York working finance are busting their fucking asses. And, I have a lot of respect for them doing that. But for me, that wasn't quite right either. So how could I do something that kind of utilized some of my skills and that I could apply my ability to think creatively and think like that, and marketing just seemed to be the way to do it.
All right, that makes sense. What about the name change? Why Aubrey?
So Aubrey was I was born. This is the real one of the main impetuses to this is not anything mystical. People tag this to my experience in the jungle, and it did coincide, and that has some aspect to it. But I was born Michael Aubrey Christopher Marcus. That was my name on my birth certificate. So early on, though, everybody started calling me Chris because my father's name was Michael. So I had everybody calling me Chris. But then when I got my driver's license, it said Michael. When I got my credit cards, it said Michael. When I checked into a hotel, it was Michael. When I got a gym membership, it was Michael. So not always, though. Some gym memberships, I'd be able to fill it out as Chris. Other things with Chris. So I had this kind of constant, am I Michael or am I Chris kind of. And it seems like nothing, right? But it's a little weird, when you walk up to a counter and they're like, okay, so I'll look up at your account. What's your name? And you go, Michael. And they're like, no, I'm sorry, we don't have it. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Chris. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? You a fucking crazy person?
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, what's wrong with you? Don't you know your name, son? So I dealt with a don't you know your name, son kind of look for forever. So I wanted to remedy that at some point. I was like, look, this is bullshit. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of having, to deal with this kind of nonsense. And the name Aubrey was, out of all those names, Michael was my father's name, and I just never really sat. That was my father's name, and I'm not him, and I love him, and he's great, and I just didn't want to be him, so the Michael didn't make sense. I never knew my grandfather Aubrey, but I'd known a lot about him. He was my grandmother Bonnie, who's tattooed on me. It was her husband who died before I was born. He was, a top fencer in the Army, was a English scholar and a teacher. And, some of his favorite books, some of his Chaucer tales and some of his other things have become my favorite books. And there's just a kind of weird spiritual affinity where, I look at old pictures of him and I see my spirit in him. And I'd always kind of seen that. And so instead of, just changing my name to Chris, which really was kind of empty for me, didn't have any real meaning, and I would have to go through the name change anyways, I decided to go with my other middle name, which was Aubrey. And it just had a more meaningful kind of spiritual feel to it. And when I was in the jungle in Peru taking the ayahuasca, it was a real death rebirth experience. I feel like that was the time where I really shed so much of my lingering fears. And it wasn't a fear of death. As I said, I kind of conquered that fear initially, but I had an immense fear of suffering, which has grown back a little bit, but but I killed it for the most part when I was there, and killed a lot of parts of my old identity, some vanities, some other things. And so with that, you know, at that moment, I was like, all right, this is the moment where I make the switch. It's a clean break. You know, I had a death as Chris, and I can be reborn as Aubrey, and Aubrey epitomizing the best of what I want for myself. So that's the story of the name change. It's been, you know, probably more of a pain in the ass than I even expected. It's just hard for people to change the name, you know, to change what they call you. But
has that been in trouble with friends and family?
Well, some people are stubborn, you know, they like won't adopt. And I'm like, what's your problem? You know, and then most people are cool with it though. It just seems to be like the older the individual, the more stubborn they are.
They're stuck in their ways.
They're stuck in their ways. They want to call me Chris, which I don't really care that much, but it is kind of more, obviously a lot more respectful to call me by my real name, which is now fully legally changed. And it's, God, I can't say how cool it is now to be able to say, you know, when someone says, hey, what's your name, from the fucking cell phone company or the bank or whatever, I'm like, Aubrey Michael Marcus. Like, I know that shit.
I know it now.
I know it now. So that's been a real blessing. But I'm glad I did it. I haven't regretted it for a minute ever since I did it. It means more to me, and it's solved a lot of practical worrisome issues.
Well, good. I'm glad that you've been reborn as Aubrey.
That's it.
You can identify with it now instead of going back and forth.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything you think we missed? Anything you want to touch on?
Oh, man. We were so all over the place. I think, let me look back and see. I think that's largely it. You know, I mean, I think a lot of these other things I've explored on the Warrior Poet, and certain ideas and concepts can keep touching on in other podcasts, but this gives a good idea of who I am and a little bit more about me. And I think that's been, you know, what I'd gotten some requests for, and hopefully I've done a pretty decent job of explaining that. I'm sure when I get off here, I'll be like, oh, that was an important thing. I guess if I had to say, oh, there were some lessons learned that I would like to say. So in college, I was incredibly troubled by what I was going to become and what I was going to be, and troubled to the point where it was almost depressing. You know, like I would get really sad. I was like, what am I doing with myself? Why? And looking back, you know, it all worked out, you know, and it didn't work out because I was worried about it. It worked out because I wasn't ready to be the CEO of Onnit then, or the spokesperson of Warrior Poet. You know, I wasn't the person who could be that. And that I had to change first. I had to grow. I had to evolve. And so, you know, if you're stuck in that position where you're worried about, oh, what am I going to be? What am I going to do? What's my plans? You know, just trust that if you're growing and if you're getting better, you know, the path will illuminate itself. And I didn't have that trust then. I thought I had to fucking figure it out and hammer it out. And every time I didn't do it, I was bummed out. So, you know, whereas I could have been, you know, a lot more in the moment and enjoyed myself a lot more, doesn't mean don't work hard, but it just means take some of that pressure off, you know, if you can. And just trust that, you know, focus on improving yourself, focus on being better yourself, and the rest will come. And that was an important lesson that I would apply if I could look back.
Kind of enjoy the journey.
Enjoy the journey, yeah. And just trust that, you know, as awesome as you think you are, you know, have the humility to know that you're not quite ready yet. You could be better. And I even know that now. I mean, people ask me, Aubrey, when are you going to write a book? I will, but I want to be better when I write that book. You know, I want to be more ready, be more wiser, you know, have more knowledge, have more experience. And, you know, hopefully, I think you can apply that to the same thing, you know, a certain sense of humility and a certain sense of self-improvement, you know, and it doesn't mean delay it forever. Oh, I'm not ready yet. Oh, I'm not ready yet. At a certain point, you gotta ship it, like Stephen Pressfield said. You just gotta fucking go. And you'll know when that is too. But also, you know, if you're still preparing, don't get too bent out of shape about that. And then, yeah, I think that's one of the key lessons that I would, if I look back on my life. And also take care of your health early. You know, I've had my own different struggles from stupid things I've done. I mean, I always had a good sense of balance, but I was also always able to handle intoxicants really well. And I had 3 older brothers. So, you know, when I would party in high school, I never drunk and drive because I knew the risks of that and I saw the dangers. But when I was in a safe place, I would get ripped. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I did that through college, and that's fine. And there's a time and a place for that. But, you know, for me, when I was working out that hard and partying still hard, I put so much of a strain on my body. I ended up getting that kind of a form of mono called Epstein-Barr, which is pretty common. But it's something that's like, it's a weight that's still on me that, you know, you never get to lift. It's one of those things that never goes away. It doesn't transmit or anything, but it's like a constant weight on your immune system. And other things that I've done, you know, I would get sick and I'd have to take a bunch of antibiotics. And that would, you know, that messed up the probiotic ratio in my gut. So even if you're young, even if you feel like fucking strong like bull and like a young buck, you know, have a little keen sense for your health, because it's all adding up to a cumulative kind of total. So don't push it too hard.
And even if you are older and you've done that to your body and partied hard, it's never too late to start. Might be a little harder, but get started now. Exactly.
And that's another thing too. If I had to say another lesson learned is, some part of you thinks, oh, it's too late. I should have done that already. You know, I'm too old for that. Oh, it's too late.
In every aspect of life.
Every aspect. And that's just a bullshit rationalization. It's never too late. You know, you can start whenever the fuck you want. I mean, Stephen Pressfield's another great example of that, where he turned professional as an author, you know, way into his adulthood. In his 30s, that's when he started first publishing. You know, you would think, oh, I'm too old to be an author, or whatever it is. But whatever it is, your health, your love life, your career, it's not too late. Don't let that be an excuse. You know, don't think I should have got started early. You know, doesn't matter whatever the fuck it is. You know, go after it. You know, but you know, be reasonable.
All right.
You know, I mean, if you're trying to be a, you know, skincare teen model and you're 40, you know,
might be a little difficult.
Might be a little difficult. So, you know, don't beat your head against the wall. That's not going to get broken. But don't let that be a crutch. You know, don't let that be an excuse. I think that's another important thing.
As far as moving forward and looking into the future, what do we have to expect from you when it comes to Warrior Poet or anything like that? What do you have for us?
Well, I want to basically hone in a bit more on what these medicines do, what their benefits are, find resources for people to legally take them, because, you know, as much as I praise the benefits of certain things, I do also respect that it's important to have a good sitter or a shaman, which generally comes from indigenous settings. And I don't like having the pressure and the concern and the risk of, you know, the government throwing you in a fucking cage for doing this, you know. So exploring kind of indigenous options for these things. Hopefully the laws change in our time, but also kind of illuminating what kind of legal medicines, legal options are going to be there. I'm going to be focused probably a bit more on some shamanic breathing techniques and other ways to kind of break you out of your patterns of thinking that are legal, and provide more solutions rather than just stories. So I think the way Warrior Poet's going to go is, yes, I'm going to be bringing back wisdom, but I'm really going to try and push forward with some more, you know, solutions. Like, hey guys, this is a routine that I got. You know, you can get these herbs from here, and you can breathe in this manner and do it this way, listening to this music. Give it a fucking shot. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I think more practical approaches to Warrior Poet are coming. You know, the amount of content of information that I keep getting when I go over to the other side, a lot of it is reiteration. So these crazy stories, like the initial story from Peru and the initial Iboga story, they're going to be diminishing just by nature. There's not that much truth that's out there, and truth doesn't change if it's actually truth. Mm-hmm. So while there'll be little tidbits, like the story about the dragon and the bear and the eagle I told last time, that was a tidbit compared to what I got from the last time. It was a fraction. And so the next time I do it will be a fraction thereof, and then the next time is a fraction thereof. Same with the boga. I don't expect the same amount of content to come out the next time I do that. But I will keep trying these different things, keep kind of exploring that, but really getting practical, I think, is what I'm going to be focused on. And even creating different little hands-on experiences where we can take a group out, either here in the States with some legal options, or out in other countries where other medicines are legal, and leading some kind of guided tours and guided experiences, and almost creating a certain brother or sisterhood of people who've kind of, I don't know, those are kind of ideas that are initially forming, is the kind of, let's go on this journey together. Let's build these bonds. Let's learn. Let's go through these mutual hardships and explorations and things like that. And then you go out and be your own little warrior poet, almost like a warrior poet training school of sorts. So there's some thoughts of that, and obviously a lot more details need to come into play, but the future is going to start getting practical, more than anything. I also have some cool videos that I'm going to be making, similar to what Jason Silva was doing with his short videos, but obviously warrior poet themed. Those aren't too far out. And, I think that's a lot of it. And then ultimately, I'm going to write a book similar to what Aldous Huxley did in his book, The Island, which kind of combines all of the wisdom that I've gotten. But that book's a couple years away. That's it. I think, a couple other little projects, poetry anthology I'm going to finally come out with of all my years of poetic anguish and romantic and misadventures. So some few more personal things will come out, but that's kind of the future there. And the future with Onnit is just, more of the same, better products, new foods, power foods that can help you out in the line of hemp force. And we're making some bars now too. And then fitness equipment, coming out with some cool stuff and some old school but cutting edge kind of vibe that you don't need to go to a health club to do. You can build up your own home garage and be a savage like Joe Rogan himself,
right?
Or many of the other fans and customers that we have out there. So,
well, good. We have a lot to look forward to then.
We do.
You're a busy man.
I am, and I feel like I owe it. I owe it to everybody out there, and more so. I mean, the last incident where we had that security breach was, such a amazingly humbling experience for me, because, I feel like, I was robbed while people were guests in my home, and that's, even if I couldn't have prevented it, or however, FBI is working on how this happened and whatever, it still happened in my home on my watch, and the way that everybody responded to that and was supportive, and some people were upset and some people cursed at us, and but overwhelmingly people were humble and cool and responded in such a positive way that it inspires me, and I feel like not only do I want to work harder and want to bring more, but it's my duty. I owe it to these customers and these fans and everybody to do my best to bring that to them. Anything less would be, just wouldn't be right. They've, cumulatively what they've given me, I got to work my ass off to give it back, because all these guys have been unbelievable. So,
and you wouldn't be where you are today without them.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I wouldn't be where I'm going without them too, because it's easy to lose faith, and it's easy to say, who cares? Let's just relax and not worry about it. But I know, there's people out there hungry for things to improve their life, both, words, knowledge, products, foods, everything, fitness stuff. People are hungry to get better. And if I have an opportunity to do that and I'm sitting on my ass, I'm missing the boat.
Right.
Yeah. Well, my one regret of this podcast here is we haven't got to delve into your fine brain as well. But perhaps another time on the Warrior Poet Experience, we'll turn the tables and I'll do a little less of the talking and more of the asking, and we'll find out what's made you the remarkable woman that you are, and give that perspective as well.
One day.
One day you'll let me know.
You can never find me again.
One day you'll let me know when you're ready.
Well, I'm glad that you really opened yourself up to everybody and didn't really hold anything back.
Yeah, I hope not. I don't think I did. I don't think I did. So hopefully people dig it. I certainly went over my allotted time, but I guess to compress 31 years into an hour 40 minutes is reasonable. So
right.
We'll live with that. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to the Warrior Poet Project. This is podcast number 8, a unique podcast, an exploration of yours truly. So thanks for tuning in. Much love, and we'll be back to our regular programming hopefully sometime soon. So adios for now.